how it's going right now.
Sounds good.
So yeah, I think we're just gonna talk about kind of like the school culture project. And you're right. I don't have this shit all that well prepared. I just kind of have some handwritten notes and stuff, and then I'm in the process of doing like the PowerPoint stuff. It shouldn't take too long, I don't think, and it's kind of straightforward. Um, but yeah, that, and then I guess the blog thing, the second blog is due this weekend, and then we have another meeting. Is it this weekend or next weekend?
I think it's next
I think
weekend.
it's next weekend, yeah. But yeah, did you get just checked today and I saw that the teacher had responded to our stuff, and are you getting
What
those?
stuff?
Like
What stuff?
your blog post and stuff?
Oh,
And then your response to other, like, it's in the grades. I went and looked on the actual online thing and checked it. And so like your grade is posted for the first discussion and something else, like your response to other people's comments. But yeah, that's, I think she
I'll look
just,
at that in a second.
yeah, I'm sure you got it because I think it was just like writing your initial thing on your blog and then
Uh,
responding to like a couple other people's
Other
or whatever.
people's. Alright, I'll take a look real quick. But as going with the PowerPoint, I mean, all I've seen so far is like I've read the directions,
Yeah.
I've taken a look at the examples.
So yeah, I think that example was the most helpful thing for it. So like it's going to be just kind of a brief overview of your school kind of culture, everything from kind of like what the community and the demographic of your students are, and then how that like affects not only the school culture, but then how that affects you specifically as a teacher and kind of like what you have to know, like the ins and outs. It's probably, I imagine you are in a similar situation to I am. Like at Monte Vista, like we got really high level students. The culture is like in the community is to perform at a high level, and academics is really important. And I'm sure you also have the same thing, like music and all the other extracurricular, like you probably have way more, but we have a Japanese class that like the kids are all about, and I'm sure you guys have like Chinese classes outside of school time where it's like a community organized type thing.
Yeah, we have like everything. We have what? Besides the actual classes that we got our what? Our clubs. These kids are always doing after school activities.
Exactly.
Usually more than one.
Yep. Well, and that's the thing. I think like the entire my mom actually, she works in the Cupertino in like the elementary school district. So she's a speech therapist. So she sees kind of a lot of those kids, and she kind of has a pretty good finger on the pulse of like that community. She says that it's high level academics, and the parents are, for better or worse, they pushed really, really hard for the academics, and then also like the community aspect of it, and then she said tons of her kids do some sort of music, like regardless of what level they do it at, they're always doing like some sort of music.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I see it a lot of times too. I mean, for like anyone, for my PowerPoint, it's pretty much gonna be it's gonna be like that. It's gonna be like, what is the school culture? You're gonna see all this stuff here. Um, it's gonna be like huge. I guess you got black and white. You always hear about these school areas where like it's all the lower expectations and all that
Yep.
stuff. Here, you see. Here you see high expectations. It's the community that's around here that you see, but it's really just one of those things that like, you don't necessarily have to be rich to be in this area. You
Yeah.
kind of do, kind of don't, but you still get that expectation in
Well,
school.
what my mom has said is actually that the Cupertino services, if you need any sort of like special ed or anything along those lines, is really, really good. So she finds that because of word of mouth in different ethnic like communities, in the Indian community and the Chinese, people start coming to the area specifically because they know that they'll get really good services there, because they really have good programs and they have everything else, extra speech help and everything else. One of the downsides that I see of it is, at least a lot of the kids at Los Gatos, like they're totally overworked and they have so many extracurricular things that it's like, they're being asked to perform at the highest level on so many different levels that, it's stressful. I kind of remember going through that same thing at Los Gatos, and like, you know, if you don't go to a 4-year college, in a lot of ways you're kind of a failure in this community, even though that wouldn't be the case in basically any other community.
It's actually kind of strange because we're looking at statistics about students graduating
Hmm.
just a while back, and like, well, we have this like a lot of these students have these expectations, these families have these expectations that their kids are going to go there.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of time, a lot of times these kids don't actually end up going there. They'll get into these schools, but because like financial reasons or other things,
Yep.
they'll go somewhere else first.
That's
And
interesting.
to have these expectations, but just strive for so much, and it's like it really. I hate to say this, but I always feel like college is like your undergrad is more like your high school what it was 30 years ago.
Yep.
It's pretty much how it is.
Well, and you went to Monte Vista, right? So you probably felt the same way I did. When I went to college, and I went to Santa Barbara, and it was hard to get in there. It's harder now, but I felt over prepared for it because of my high school experience. It's just one of those things. Like, it was the academics were hard, and they put a lot on your plate, and they had high expectations. And then when you get to college, in a lot of ways, because you're not like in a room of 30 kids with a teacher, you're in a room of 500 kids with a teacher. So the teacher is not really able to hold you to the highest expectations except for what they ask of you on like a test or some sort of exam or a project. So I felt really over prepared. And that's the other thing is, at a school like Los Gatos or Monte Vista, we have lots of AP classes. And so I went in with, like a quarter and a half worth of credit, which is, I didn't need to take those classes. I could skip a couple classes, and in like the case of history, I never had to take a history class except for ones that I took kind of like in an elective sense, and I just was interested, and it fulfilled 4 more units, but it wasn't really 4 more units towards a specific thing.
It's I don't know you trigger something in my head. It's like what you mentioned about expectations. Like we have all these expectations here.
Hmm.
Once they get to college, I always feel like the belt loosens a little bit,
Yep.
and then you find out that these kids really don't have like with the parents gone, without the teachers, their own expectations aren't there.
Exactly. Well, and they're still there, but they're there remotely. So like
Yeah,
one of the
it's not
thing
as small.
one of the things that I always tell all the swim kids and the dive kids, like I tell their parents, I could care less about how you perform in the swimming pool, or even I'd love to see you improve your times, but I really could care less about that. What it's really about is, after 4 years in this program, I'm hoping that that prepares you to do college. And because it's a responsibility, you have to kind of be in self-control and kind of self-motivate yourself in these situations, because when you get to college, it's not like you got your folks saying, did you do your homework and are you ready for the test? It's, at Santa Barbara there were a lot of distractions, and it was a great time, but at the same time, I had to kind of recognize when it was like, okay, I got a test next week, I have to go to a place I can study, and that's not in my dorm, and that's not at my buddy's house or at my house when I lived like off campus. It took a lot of self-control to do that. And I went to school with a bunch of kids who came from Los Gatos, went to Santa Barbara, and within the first quarter they had had to drop out and go to the Santa Barbara City College because they just couldn't cut it.
You know what? It gets me thinking. It gets me thinking that what you see high school should be more about is more about preparing you. It is supposed to prepare you for college, but it
Yep,
should be more geared towards that rather than the academics that we see, because we're over prepared now.
exactly.
Going into this, I went into like my freshman year, sophomore year. I was like, I remember this from like freshman biology in high school.
So when you look at the curriculum, like, so what I find when I look at the curriculum for Los Gatos is they teach not only to the STAR test, which is what they need to do, but they teach well beyond it. And in some ways, it would be to their advantage to take that extra stuff out. I mean, it's great to have the kids understand like a higher level of science or a higher level of whatever, but why not teach them how to be better students, like study skills, test taking skills, like ways to reduce your anxiety about test taking, like those kind of things are really, really helpful. I took a speed reading class when I was in high school. My mom made me do it. I fucking hated her for it. But the thing was, I still use it, and at the very least, you can skim stuff really quickly, figure out what's important, and that tool, when you look at like any sort of learning situation, that's like a really powerful tool. And to be able to kind of differentiate that and actually like have a structure and a procedure for going through those steps as a student, that's one of the things I think high school has lost. It's so much about the test and the star test and performing and getting all the credits for college. you know in some ways they totally forget that like a lot of these kids don't know how to study. They don't know how to like analytically read something out of a textbook and be able to take what's important and what's kind of peripheral in the text.
It's not just. I agree, totally agree. And it's not even just preparing them to study.
Hmm.
It's just preparing to be be about themselves.
Independent.
It doesn't prepare them to be independent.
Yep.
I mean, it's great. I mean, like in schools like ours, there's so much support, but at the same time, there's so much hand holding in the same sense.
Exactly.
There's so much expectations. If we were, I agree. Like, you know what? We should take down. Like, we don't need it. Yes, it's great. You have all these high standards. Prepare them if they go off to college
Yep.
and learn these things. But at the same time, why don't you just settle back a little bit and get them so that they can do it on their own?
Exactly.
Right now, I mean, there's drive here. You're in the community. You have friends that are in that mindset too. Their parents got them in that mindset. But once you get over to college, oh my God, mindset's totally changed. There's so much freedom.
Exactly. Well, I think the other thing is like, that unfortunately, that mentality, like that hard push from the community, that's what leads to cheating. Like that's what leads to kids just doing the bare minimum to scoot by because they know that, it's not going to matter after high school. And unfortunately, like, um, you know, there's there's all sorts of high level, like you heard about the Harvard thing, the whole cheating scandal there, and it's like that kids shouldn't kids shouldn't feel forced to do that because of the community. And that's one of the things, like when I look at Los Gatos, it's a high aspiration community, and unfortunately a lot of the parents, that because they can't have as much kind of one-on-one, they work in the Silicon Valley, because they don't have a whole lot of one-on-one time with their kid. They're the only expectations that are getting like kind of broadcast from their end is that I want you to do well at school, and academics is number one. And that's true, but they also kind of, kids should understand that academics is a measure of how well you understand something. It's not, you shouldn't just try and get A's on the test. You should try and understand what the concept is. And that's one of the problems with standardized testing in general is like, you're testing all these facts basically, when in reality you kind of want to test the methods of how kids get to an answer.
Yeah, I know it's one of those things you fail to. You can give all this information down. They can remember it. They can learn it. But to fully understand it, to utilize it, to apply it to themselves,
Yep.
to use it later on in life, it's lacking a lot.
Yeah. It's one thing to be able to memorize a bunch of things, and some kids are really good at that. It's a whole nother level to be able to kind of interpret and then predict. Like science, that's the kind of the best place, like setting to show that is the fact that, you know, the whole scientific method is a process that any kid going through high school science should come away with, because it's not only useful in science, it's useful in everyday problem solving. And you know
The whole mindset,
exactly, being able to kind of look at
process, logic, do things.
exactly.
It's common sense.
Exactly. It really is, but it's only common sense if you're if you have that like kind of background and you appreciate it. And lots of kids, one of my greatest goals in the class that I have is like you want the kids to come away with the idea that like, science is in this classroom and there's stuff we have to learn, but there's a whole bunch of other things that are, outside of the classroom that are important to understand, and with a science background you can have a better understanding of those things.